Local programming on KRWG made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
This is KRWG, TV, radio, online, news that matters. Now, across the Mesilla Valley and the borderland, the stories that shape our community. From the KRWG Broadcast Center at New Mexico State University, this is Newsmakers.
Up front this week, the route for many students after high school includes attending a university or community college. But that's not the only route. In Deming, some high school students are ready for the workforce right after graduation. Michael Hernandez reports.
Students in Deming High School's Career and Technical Education, or CTE program, aren't just talking shop, they're trained for it as soon as they graduate. Students and faculty spoke to New Mexico's Legislative Education Study Committee recently about the school's vocational programs, where students can become industry certified in jobs ranging from construction and engineering to health science and culinary arts. Senior David Velez has studied computer-aided design since he was a freshman and hopes to work with rockets at NASA. While he's not in a CTE pathway, Velez says the knowledge he's gained in computer modeling software and 3D printing has helped prepare him for the aerospace industry.
You need to make things on a computer before you actually make them in the real world, and that is the biggest aspect, because I'm going to have to use that in the future with the career I'd like to go to. So creating that basis so that I can walk in and maybe already know a lot of what that software requires is the most important part.
Velez says the classes he's taken in calculus and physics, combined with gaining hands-on experience, has helped clear the way for his engineering career.
It showed me that I need to take those classes as well as learn through the engineering classes hands-on things, tools, 3D printing, milling machines, laser cutters. I need to learn the interfaces that those require so that I already have a step up on the industry, so I know what they need me to do first.
After 3 years in his program, carpentry teacher George Wirtz says students can begin an apprenticeship and learn the trade through class and on-the-job experience. His first-year students learn basic woodworking skills, while higher-level classes teach students how to install doors and windows and even build houses.
The level 1 students a lot of times come in thinking that they're getting something, and they find out it's something completely different. And as they find that, they may decide, well, I don't like this, I like to weld instead of carpentry. And that's fine, and that's kind of what that level 1's for, it's basics. But I'm finding as the students who certify level 2 tend to stay with us for level 3 and level 4.
2016 district data show 51% of Deming CTE students are proficient in reading compared to 18% of non-CTE students, while 41% of students are proficient in math compared to just 4% of students not in the program. CTE students also graduate nearly 15% more than those not enrolled. Deming High School has also received accolades for its CTE programs in national competition. It won its 4th straight title this year in the school chapter for Skills USA, a national career and technical student organization, and recently won state titles in math, engineering, science, and culinary arts competitions. Democratic State Senator Bill Soules says more New Mexico schools should provide the same level of support in CTE that Deming does.
Too often we talk about colleges being a goal. And in Deming, they really are looking at careers and leading a good life as being the goal, of which college is part of that. And they're making sure that their students have access to high quality career and technical education that leads to real jobs, real careers in fields for students who may not be interested in going on to college. And that's what we ought to be doing all across the state.
Deming officials say the school receives nearly $60,000 a year in federal funding. But as the cost of materials like lumber and metal go up, Wirtz says so do the challenges of how much he can teach his students. He also says skilled trades are facing an aging workforce.
They're mostly over 50 years old, and they're expecting a 40 to 60% turnover in the next 10 years in that skilled workforce. And so that's where the gap comes in. Who's going to fill those? And right now, we don't have the people in line in the United States to fill those gaps. And so that's the purpose of what we offer is we are trying to get them with basic training so that they can go into an apprenticeship and help fill that gap in our workforce.
Wirtz says students who take his class and choose to do something else will still have real-world experience they can use later in life. He says while he doesn't discourage students from attending college, he doesn't encourage it either.
They think that that's the only option for them. And there's a lot of very good jobs that make a very good living that don't require you stepping in college one day. So if they want to or if they need to, I fully support it and I encourage it. But there's many that don't, and so I spend a lot of time talking them out of it, wasting time and wasting money.
As for Velez, he's attending Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Prescott, Arizona in the fall to study aerospace engineering. Velez says his CTE classes have been the highlight of his high school career.
They give me something to look forward to, something that I want to do, and allowed me to work towards that goal. Doing those things is really what has encouraged me to become an engineer, has kept me interested and kept me wanting to do what I do. And it's really, really encouraging to have someone, especially a teacher, that is interested in helping you get there.
Whether college or trade, officials say encouraging students to follow their passion is what matters most. For KRWG, I'm Michael Hernandez.
Welcome to In Focus. I'm Anthony Moreno. Our guest today is Jerry Pacheco. He is president of the Border Industrial Association, executive director of the International Business Accelerator, and he also writes a column for the Albuquerque Journal titled Business Across the Border. We continue our conversation with Mr. Pacheco now about trade, tariffs, and business along the borders. Mr. Pacheco, when we last left off in our conversation, you were talking about other countries having opportunities to move in where the United States is pulling back. How is that going to impact business, in the U.S. and specifically along the border here in New Mexico?
I'll give you a specific example. We have a manufacturer in a really popular industrial field who's going to get affected by these tariffs on steel exports to Mexico. Okay, they have a minor competitor in Mexico that really doesn't participate, or they can't compete in the field that our Santa Teresa manufacturer is in, because our Santa Teresa manufacturer is so efficient. They've been in the industry a long time. They know what they're doing. They've got their customers locked up. Because of the tariffs on certain parts of the steel that they're shipping into Mexico, and that's the industry they're in, by the way, the tariff situation has allowed a Mexican company, which is an international company, but they have a presence in Mexico, to actually look at the industry our Santa Teresa company is in. That wouldn't have happened if we wouldn't have been down the road in this trade war and Mexico wouldn't have retaliated.
Now, you mentioned trade war there. Are we at the point now where we really need to understand what exactly is a trade war and how it's going to impact the United States?
Well, it's like a tit-for-tat kind of deal. It's we started it, by the way. It's like you punch somebody. They can either walk away and say, well, I'm the better person or whatever, but most likely somebody's going to punch right back. Well, the United States is the 800-pound gorilla in the world. We're still the world's largest economy, but we're not the world's economy. We don't account for 50% of the world's economy anymore. So by taking action of wholesale slapping tariffs against China, you slap tariffs against Mexico, against Europe, I don't see how the administration, the Trump administration, and he actually said this, I don't think they're going to retaliate. And he referred to Mexico when he said that. Of course they're going to retaliate. They've got to. It's not only an economic thing, it's a political thing. If you're the Mexican president and you don't retaliate and you get punched in the eye, your population and your constituents are not going to be supporting you. So it's a very disturbing trend. We come out with the tariff. A couple of days later, our allies and adversaries, I would understand if we were playing this game with adversaries, but our allies are doing the same thing to us. Canada and Mexico, the European Union. We're going to stand alone in this world, not only economically, but politically. And I just see a lot of harm being done right now.
Now, I want to talk about that a little bit more. You mentioned harm politically. how can that harm be done when it comes to the United States standing not only as an economic power, but politically in the world?
Well, one of the things I'll point out is if we're so apt to cancel agreements like the Iran non-nuclear proliferation agreement, if the president is so apt to tear up NAFTA, he says going to tear it up, why would any nation in the future take the word of the United States when it enters into an agreement or some kind of an arrangement with us, when we're not a reliable partner that they can rely on? Yeah, NAFTA needs to be renegotiated. There's not a single person I've ever spoken to that says it can be updated. It can stand to be updated. But to tear it up, or even to put a clause which is holding back the negotiations, our approach to the NAFTA agreement is that we want to renegotiate it, but have it expire every 5 years, and then have it renegotiated. How can I tell a company that's going to invest $30 million in the Santa Teresa industrial base, please come to Santa Teresa, but in 5 years your business model might totally be turned on its head?
Now it seems like, yeah, that could obviously impact you recruiting businesses. What about the businesses that have already made major investments in Santa Teresa? Obviously, last year, your area where you work took over as leading in the state in exports, as the top exporting business area. So what does that do to the businesses that are succeeding there, that want to grow? What are their thoughts now?
I can tell you of at least 3 companies that have frankly told me that they would have added another line, they would have hired 15 people, they would have done this, they would have brought another line down from Wisconsin or wherever they are, whatever, the Midwest, but they're not going to do it in this tumultuous business environment. They cannot spend that kind of money on a business model that could change next week or after the elections or tomorrow or this afternoon. I mean, I sound extreme when I say that in terms of the changes, but it's not extreme at all. I'm serious when I say I don't know what's going to come out of Washington in the afternoon. So the companies that we have in our industrial base, God bless them, they're putting their nose to the grindstone, they're going forward, they're taking these hits. Some of the companies that are affected by the tariffs are sucking it up, and we haven't lost a company yet. But the real question I have is how many more companies would have come? And that's the $64,000 question. I don't know. How many more jobs would have been created in the industrial base? Because we've had momentum, as you know, for the last 20 years. We've really had momentum in Santa Teresa. I can't answer how many would have come, how many jobs would have been there. But I think we would have had more, in my opinion, being at the ground level here. We would have had more companies and more jobs had not this trade war and this kind of fight that we initiated started.
The president has obviously issued some pretty tough rhetoric when it comes to border security and securing the U.S.-Mexico border. How does that impact business along the border, business with Mexico that you've been encountering over the last year?
We've had a fence in Santa Teresa, a big fence, a wall, I guess you could describe it, since 9/11. I support secure borders. There's not a single one of us who operates there or lives there would want the border overrun. And I hate the reports that the border's being overrun by the... No, it's not, okay? Yeah, there's people crossing illegally. Yeah, there's contraband, but it makes it sound like hordes of people are coming across. That's not the truth. We have one industrial park that abuts the border. Our other 3 industrial parks are a few miles north. There's no way, if the border was insecure, that we could ever hope to recruit companies that are investing. One company invested $100 million. Are they going to do that in an area that's so insecure? I think the effect it has on us is more of a bother because you've got disruptions at the borders once in a while because the wall from Santa Teresa is being extended 20 miles to the west. Doesn't really affect us, but when the company has to tap into the water system and all of a sudden I get a call, hey, our water's out. What happened? Well, the company that's building the wall, whatever. It's more of a bother than anything. It's not reality that there's insecurity and it's affecting us.
What about the recent issue with the separation of families at the border. Has that had any impact with business or anything like that?
Not from business, but I can tell you, to a business owner, the spiritual effect it has had on us. Because if you work at the U.S.-Mexico border, you automatically become an ambassador for cross-border relations, okay? For me to go to Mexico yesterday and spend the day there trying to, working with a customs broker, getting all this art to Silver City, and that topic comes up with the Mexicans, and they're not very mean to me, but it's a topic of discussion. And I feel ashamed that we as a country got to the point, and we were calling them tender holding areas or whatever. It just brought back the concentration camp, it brought re-education camp, all that kind of nomenclature that was used to describe something so horrible. I don't see how we as a nation that has opened up our arms to the world throughout our history and has been a compassionate nation has gotten to this point. I think it's more of a spiritual effect on all of us that work on the border, and we're so glad that's being or supposedly going to be resolved.
Businesses at the border right now, I imagine that you're on the phone a lot with them constantly, trying to keep them updated on what's happening and things like that. You also have to connect with the U.S. government, the Department of Commerce. Mm-hmm. How has that relationship been when trying to understand what's happening when all these announcements get made as far as tariffs go?
It's a fire drill. We have a great relationship with our local guy. Bob Queen represents the Department of Commerce in El Paso and southern New Mexico. He's been a good friend for many, many years. But I feel sorry for him because when these announcements come out and I try to contact him and, hey, Bob, how's this going to work? How's it going to be implemented? He doesn't know. So he scrambles back to Washington. They don't know. We go to Mexico. They don't know. You know, it seems like the war happens at the highest levels, and then it kind of trickles down slowly, the effects to the people on the ground. The end result is just confusion, and the last thing you want when you're trying to recruit investment and businesses is an unstable business environment, and that's what we're creating.
I want to talk a little bit more about China. We obviously talked about that in our last conversation. With everything that's happening with potential trade wars with other countries and things like that, how does China react? How is it reacting? Are they taking from the playbook that we wrote?
Well, they are. I mean, their actions kind of mirror what we're doing in this trade war. But the other effect that I think has occurred, I think it's emboldened China. China was always content to kind of be a little mousy and this and that and what have you. They've come out to be more vocal. They've been more emboldened to hit right back. And the thing about China that scares me is not so much that they're going to slap tariffs on what we're doing to them. They have the ability to pick at U.S. investment in China that has taken 25 years to get embedded there and know the Chinese system and start making money for U.S. companies, okay? And a lot of U.S. workers here depend on what's going on in those companies in China. China has the ability to disrupt that. And to me, even more than tariffs going back and forth, the ability of China to go back to the old Chinese ways of no foreign investment in China, or if you have a foreign investment, we're going to watch you, you're going to have a government person. That's what scares me more than anything.
Now, President Trump, when he came into office early in his first term here, he, basically eliminated the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, the chance of that happening. If that would have went through, if the United States was in that partnership, how would have that played a role in China's role in this possible trade war?
We would have pretty much put China in check. And I'll tell you why, because that was an agreement in which the United States had the ability to kind of corral all of Asia and the Pacific nations, put them into a trade agreement where we have say, and we're the big dogs in having the say in negotiating that, which we had been negotiating it, and we lock all these nations, some that have rogue practices, some that don't cooperate, into this agreement. China was not, part of that. And so all of a sudden, we had an opportunity to kind of lock up Asia, not only economically, but from a political standpoint, because politics and trade feed off of each other. By us, on the first day of Trump's presidency, by pulling out of that whole agreement, I mean, it's like you invite the wolf to come in and say, okay, eat the pieces here, okay, you know, take what we leave on the table. And that's what's going to happen, and it's happening already.
We only have less than a minute left, but I'd like to hear, you know, what you think the next year is going to be like. What's your greatest concern? I'd like to hear.
The greatest concern is locally that NAFTA goes away. I always say that if NAFTA goes away, we're still going to trade, the U.S., Mexico, and Canada. However, things are going to be more expensive, and we're not going to see the level of investment and the job creation we've seen, particularly here in New Mexico. In China, I would hate to think that the Chinese use that Trump card, no pun intended, to mess with the businesses in China. Forget the tariffs. They can pretty much throw out U.S. companies or make it so hard for them to do business. With Canada, God bless Canada, our biggest ally. I hope they can forgive us going forward for the negative rhetoric we've thrown on them. And the European Union, we cannot lose them because behind them on the east is Russia. And Russia is no ally of the United States. It's proven to be no ally. So for the coming year, I hope cooler heads prevail. I hope very good economists and advisors advise the president and his team, because if what's happened in the last 6 months is kind of a harbinger for the next year, I don't even know what to tell you. I couldn't even predict what's going to happen.
Well, we look forward to having you back on, Jerry, as things unfold here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Anthony.
And we want to thank you for joining us for In Focus. I'm Anthony Moreno.
Fort Selden was established as a historic site in 1972. And so for many years, it's been operated by the New Mexico Historic Sites. But we're very excited right now because we've got a lot of great future plans for Fort Selden. And we're working on those right now. We're doing some preservation work on the ruins. We're also developing some new tours, some school outreach programs, and doing some new research on the fort. And we want to share that with our visitors.
Fort Selden was established in 1865. The reason for it to be here was to protect settlers in the Mesilla Valley and travelers on what had been the Camino Real. You were responsible for 16,000 square miles, though, which made them fairly inefficient. The fort was decommissioned in 1891. Through its tenure, the various companies that moved through this post, there were an awful lot of them. 4 of those companies were black troopers, or what we now refer to as Buffalo Soldiers. When the fort was established in 1865, a company, the 125th, were the first federal soldiers here, and they were a Buffalo Soldier unit. You also had 2 other infantry units, the 24th, you had the 38th, and you also had the 9th Cavalry.
So once the fort was established here to protect travelers and settlers on the Camino Real, it was an important part of the development of the entire valley.
In helping the community, the hospital that was part of the post here had a post surgeon. They were usually better trained than a lot of the local doctors. It was probably the best hospital anywhere around here, so if your family could get you here, the doctor would take care of you. So it was a very nice provision for the entire valley. So it was a boon like any other military post today to the local economy.
Living on a frontier fort was a real challenge for women. And the officers were the ones whose wives came to the fort. And so we have a lot of accounts, historical accounts of these women and what they wrote about living at a fort. And it was quite a challenge and quite a different type of environment for them and for their children. I think just the idea of not being in a community where you have all of the things you would expect, your women's groups and your people to help you with different chores. I think all of those things just became a big challenge here for those women. And also, I think just really being so isolated from other people and from larger communities was a real challenge.
The soldiers had done such a good job by 1878, the military found no reason to keep the fort occupied, so all the soldiers moved out. But once they had left, they started having problems with the Apaches, so the post was re-garrisoned in 1881. The post commander that re-garrisoned the fort at that time was Arthur MacArthur, a young Douglas MacArthur's father. He arrived with his wife, Pinky, and their other son, Arthur. In Douglas's memoirs, he stated that at Fort Selden as a young lad, that he learned to ride a horse and fire a gun before he could read or write.
In the museum, we have a visitor center, and it has a really interesting exhibit that has a lot of photographs from the frontier forts. They're not all of Fort Selden, but they give you a real picture of what life was like living on the fort. And so we've got a very nice visitor center. Of course, we have restrooms. We are open 9 to 5, Wednesday through Sunday, and there are rangers here that can help visitors to answer their questions and to give special tours for people who ask us to take them through the fort. And so there's a lot of opportunities here to really learn about the history of the fort, but also I think to just really experience what it's like to be in an authentic historic site.
That's our time for now. Join us this week on KRWG Radio. Every weekday, it's Morning Edition 5 to 9, Fresh Air at 11, followed by Here and Now noon to 2, and All Things Considered 4 to 7. KRWG News is always online at krwg.org, and we'd love to hear from you. Email us with your story ideas and video submissions. The address is feedback@nmsu.edu. For all of us at KRWG News, I'm Fred Martino. Have a great week. We'll see you next time on Newsmakers.